Welcome to Two Roads Crossing, a podcast production of the Christian Veterinary Mission. Do you wonder how your faith fits together with your profession? Well, join us as we explore how to live well at the intersection of two roads crossing.
Well, hello and welcome to Two Roads Crossing, a podcast production of the Christian Veterinary Mission. My name is Barry Schwenk. I'm a pastor, a veterinarian, and your host as we explore the intersection of faith and veterinary medicine. The success and global impact of CVM has been from the very beginning based upon the faithful servants of God using their profession to share the love of Christ with those around them. These are just simple men and women who have asked the question, how can I use what God has given me to serve him best? The journey isn't always easy, and it certainly is not always the same. The paths that we follow are wide and varied, and so it's always fun to look at someone else's journey to see what we can learn and what we can appreciate about how God has been moving. For that reason, today we're going to be doing another servant spotlight, and I have invited the CVM Workplace and Student Ministries Director, Dr. Lauren Charles, to join me. Hey there, Lauren. How are you?
Hey, I'm good. Thanks for having me.
Well, I appreciate it having you join us. It seems like I say this a lot to a lot of people, but probably more so for you. You're really busy, and so I appreciate your time.
I think you do say that on every call because everybody's busy, probably. But yeah, long-time listener, first-time caller. I heard all the podcasts, and it's a treat to be here because they've been a blessing to me.
Well, good. I really appreciate that. And it's always fun. It's always fun for me just to get a chance to pause a little bit and just get to hear someone else's story. And you've been with the Workplace and Student Ministries department as their director for how long now?
I think I came on as the director in October of 2019.
Okay. But now you've been connected to CVM for a lot longer than that, right?
Yes. I was already serving.
That was ominous. Yes.
Much longer, yes.
Much longer.
I'm not going to be able to hide my age for long.
Experience.
Yeah,
don't hide your experience. That's it.
Wisdom.
That's right.
I came on staff with CVM in 2009. So that's been 14 years around there. Yeah. And then got involved with CVM in 2001.
So how did that happen? So how did you first either hear about CVM, get connected to CVM? How did your those paths cross?
So my first introduction to CVM was my first week of veterinary school. I was at Auburn, and we had a great, thriving Christian Veterinary Fellowship group. And so I attended the CVF group that Wednesday. We met on Wednesdays. They still meet on Wednesdays. And I fell in love with the group. It was great. And through that group, I found my church because they did a neat thing where they had different people who were upperclassmen share about where they went to church. And so I started trying some of those churches and got involved with the church and CVF at the same time in my first year of vet school.
Now, was that, were you from that area, or were you out of state, or how close, how well did you know that community before you moved into it?
Oh, not at all. So I am from and live now in Louisville, Kentucky, and I went to Auburn. So it's like a 7.5-hour drive. So I wasn't at all familiar with Auburn. It was wonderful to get plugged into CVF and to a church because I went through a bit of an identity crisis in the beginning of veterinary school. So just a little side story. I grew up as a tennis player. And so in high school, I was the tennis player. In college, I played tennis. And so there were a few of us, we were the tennis players, that's kind of what our identity was. And I went, after 3 years, I went to vet school. And so I still had a year of eligibility left. But when I got to vet school, I was no longer smart because, everybody is
right.
smarter than me at that point. But I was also no longer the tennis player. So those were kind of the two things that I'd been identifying with more than I should have been. And those were stripped from me when I got into veterinary school. And I remember calling my tennis coach and being like, hey, can I come back? I still have that year of eligibility. He said no, fortunately, because that really helped me find my identity as a Christian in the veterinary school, because there are a lot of Christians at Auburn, and there were then as well. But my identity was just in Christ as part of CVF and as part of that church. So it was really important for me.
So was that your that transition for you? I mean, you kind of came into vet school already as a believer. Did you anticipate that this was going to be a time where you were going to have to make that transition in identity and start to grow in your faith, or was that just something that kind of hit you out of left field?
Yeah, it just hit me out of left field. I had tried to find a campus ministry in undergrad
Hmm.
and not really been successful. I walked into the Baptist Student Union, and there were some people playing ping pong or pool, and nobody really looked up. And
Hmm.
so I just didn't really know what to do. And so I walked out and gave up on that. And so didn't really get connected, didn't really have a great church home in undergrad. So I didn't know or expect any different from veterinary school, but I think about that a lot now. And I want to encourage any students who are listening to just not be like that as a CVF group, just be welcoming to new people who might just check it out once and their life could be changed. I mean, I know mine, I'm still serving with CVM 20 years later, so it definitely
Right.
was.
Well, it's and it's interesting because even from a student perspective, you walk in and you think, I'm kind of the outsider, and you're looking for a place to fit in, and yet when you don't find that soft place to land, it's really easy to take it personally and really start to question, you know, whether you ever will fit in and all those other kinds of things that go along with it. And whether it's at a student group or whether it's at your local church across the street, the same kind of thing happens, every single week, for
And
sure.
if your faith was fragile or
Yeah.
new, that would have a big impact on it. Fortunately,
Right.
mine was fairly fairly stable at that point.
Mm.
So I was able to bounce back and try again. But some people might not.
So how did that transition then work for you? So you're in vet school, you're having to kind of wrestle with your new identity and where you fit in. How was that process, and what role did that local church and those that CVF group kind of play in helping you navigate that space?
Good question. I think I had been taking in a lot of sermons, a lot of the Bible, a lot of the word for my whole life. So I was 21 at the time. So for 2 decades, I had been consuming, kind of a consumer of Christianity. And something clicked for me in through CVF, through that church. It was a church plant that I got involved with, so they needed everybody. So I was just as heavily involved with that church plant as my CVF group, and probably as vet school. I barely got by. I scraped through, but I started not just consuming, and I think of it kind of like calories. Like I started burning calories too, and so I started serving. I just that some switch flipped, and I recognized that all of this that I'd been poured in, I needed to pour back out. And so I really got excited about serving, and that's where I fell in love with just giving back and sharing what I had learned and serving others.
Yeah, that's interesting. And hopefully there's some folks that are listening that are trying to navigate, or at least move through kind of that space, and hearing that transition is really important. Were there Was it specifically with that church plant that you really started to find a place to serve, or were there other places with your CVF group that you found kind of a way to both serve and also consume, I guess, at the same time?
Yeah, I mean, it's important to do both, right? You really have a hard time pouring out if you're not full. Yeah, lots of different things. This takes me back 20 years because I hadn't really thought about all these things, but I, through that church plant, got involved with some campus ministries for undergrads too, some campus alpha navigators, and started with the undergrad students because they were a little bit younger than me, a few years younger than me at that point. And I had a trailer. We lived in trailers at Auburn, so I had my own kitchen and everything. And some of the students would call me Lauren Fettus, was like my nickname. It was just like one word. Lauren Fettus was my name because I would just like feed people. So, which is funny to think back on because I'm not a very good cook. Nobody's really looking to me to cook. But then students were happy for a lasagna or whatever I could make. So I love doing that through the church. And then I was training up other leaders. We would do kind of shepherding of different small group leaders. And then through CVF, we got real excited about short-term missions. So I went on my first short-term mission trip with CVF at the end of my first year. So I went to Venezuela on my I'd never been on a short-term mission trip before with anybody because of that tennis that I told you about before. It kind of just consumed me. So I had wanted to, but couldn't really find a way to do it and make it fit with my schedule. So I went on a short-term trip to Venezuela with Sarah Phipps, who was my short-term mission leader, which ironically, years later, she followed me onto the mission field. So that was wonderful. And then after that, at a Real Life Real Impact, I met Dr. John Kirkberg, who some of you remember. He was a dear mentor of mine. And at a Real Life Real Impact, he shared about a short-term mission trip that I think Texas A&M had taken to Mexico. And I was like, can we go? And he said that the A&M students kind of had this trip, but for some reason it didn't work out for them to go the next year. And so he let a group of Auburn students go. And so we organized a group of Auburn students to do that. And it was wonderful. And so I ended up going on that trip for 5 years, 3 of them in vet school and then 2 of them after, before I moved overseas. But the trip continued to go with Auburn students for another decade, probably after that. So that was really wonderful. I really encourage any student not to think that you have to study all the time. It's easy to think that. And if you want A's, maybe you do need to study all the time. I wouldn't know.
But C equals DVM. We all know that.
Right.
And so we
and
get
you don't
through.
have to specialize.
That's right. Well, but also there's also a richness and a fullness to that too. There's a lot of life, to be lived, and it's easy to miss out on it when you're constantly in a book, hopeful that in the future you'll have a life to live. You can miss an awful lot of time in between there. And it really helps you appreciate, because those are, same here. I've got some fond memories. I only graduated 5 or 6 years ago. I'm much younger. But sorry.
I know exactly when you graduated.
You know exactly. The time capsule has already come up. But yes, but those are some great memories. Some great memories, and really some very foundational years for you now. Because you mentioned then you continued going on these trips after vet school. What was that next step like? So now you kind of made that metamorphosis and were coming into a fuller realization of not just who you are in Christ, but what he was gifting you and calling you to do. So how did that then transition as you transitioned from vet school?
Yeah, I was sold out on serving by the time I graduated from veterinary school. So that was an easy transition. Kept doing the short-term missions, but I can't remember when it happened exactly. But at some point on those short-term mission trips, I just kind of got the bug to do long-term. And so recognized that there were some limitations to short-term missions that you could hopefully overcome with long-term missions. And so with short-term missions, it was hard to know the language and the culture and to build relationships with the people. And so I decided that I wanted to try and serve long-term. So after graduation, I went into private practice for a little while, but kind of with my eye on long-term missions already at that point. Yeah, so I continued to serve short-term for a little bit.
So when you say you had your eye on long-term, so what was that time like? How did you kind of keep your finger on that pulse? Because there are some folks who, maybe feel that call or that draw towards missions, but it's always the timing of things. And how do you know for certain, what was that process of confirmation like for you? And how did that then go from working at a clinic doing short terms into a full-time, long-term ministry?
So I think I just loved serving short term so much that mountaintop experience. I thought you could just have that all the time serving long term. So wanted to go and do that and get the fix, right? And
Oh,
just
okay, God love you. All right.
very lasts. You
That's
serve
right.
long term as well. You get your moments, but yeah,
Hmm.
it's not lasting.
Mm.
But so I think through short-term missions, recognize I went into long-term. And so I don't really remember a time of strong confirmation in that.
Mm.
I had to have more confirmation in where to go.
Mm.
That was harder. So when I told CVM that I was interested in serving long term, I expected that maybe they would give me a place because I was a single person that didn't really have a calling or feel a calling to go anywhere specific, didn't have a people group in mind or anything. So I was just a free agent and thought that would be great use for them. Tell me where to go. But Brad Fry gave me a list of like, I don't know if it was 20 or 50 countries. It might as well have been 50, right? Because it was just overwhelming.
Here's a
So that
globe,
was one
Lauren. Good luck.
Yes, exactly. Just spin it and put your finger on it, and that's where we'll send you.
Yeah.
So I
Mm.
think we have over 90 opportunities for people now.
Yeah.
So don't worry. If you apply for long term, we'll just give you the globe.
That's right. That's right. So how did then, because you eventually ended up in Bolivia. So how did that process happen for you? Are you a pros and cons kind of person, checklist person? Are you a coincidence? God kept bringing up Bolivia and random places in your life, or how did that happen?
Yeah, that one was a confirmation story that I do remember really clearly because it was interesting. So of that 1 million, I don't know, 20 places that they gave me, I kind of narrowed it down to Bolivia or Africa. And I know that one's a country and one's a continent, but
Thank you for
I had
that
opportunities.
clarification, though. I do
Yeah.
appreciate that. Thank you.
Well, I don't want other people to think that I thought they were
That's
equal either.
you're good.
So
You're
I know
good.
you know they're not, but
No, but
I
I
knew
mean,
they
I
were
appreciate
different.
when you actually do that. That's good. Okay, I like it. Go ahead.
So Africa didn't really care where. It was
Mhm.
just like lions, I just love
Right.
safari animals. And
Mhm.
so that seemed really intriguing. I had the opportunity to go on a vision trip to either one of those places coming up. And so it was kind of getting down to the wire when I needed to decide. So Mary McDonald could take me down to Bolivia on a trip with her. And this was probably like in March, and then I was going to go in May. And I think BJ Newcomer was going back to CAR or somewhere in Central Africa and could take me and show me around there. And so was praying about this. Mary gave me a deadline. I needed to decide by like Sunday night. So I
Mhm.
had like 3 days and I'm fasting and I'm praying and I'm not really knowing which one to go toward and getting all this advice from people, asking people where I should go. And somebody said, just make a list of the two places.
Mhm.
And I thought, that's ridiculous. Because, like you said, a pros and cons,
Right.
it seems ridiculous because apples and oranges, like I feel like
Right.
everything on the list would weigh different things. And
Mm.
so, how do you compare an apple to an orange? And this list doesn't make any sense. But by Sunday morning, I was desperate.
Mm.
And so I made this list, and I have the list or a picture of the list still. The Bolivia side was much longer, but apples and oranges. So remember, that's not going to sway me because I recognize they don't all weigh the same. But when I looked at the Africa side, all of the things were like these big ideas. And
Mm.
lions wasn't on there, but big ideas
Yeah.
like the least, the last, and the lost, unreached
Mm.
people groups,
Right.
AIDS, I think was on my list.
Mm.
Like these big ideas that
Mm.
I was gonna be going to glorify myself probably
Mm.
through these big things. And when I looked at the list of Bolivia and the reasons to go, they were more specific. They were more
Mm.
what I had that God had already invested in me, like some Spanish and some relationships with people that were already there, or different opportunities that were waiting for me, and a team that could use me. And I recognized that if I went to Bolivia, I would be able to glorify God. If
Mm.
I went to Africa, I felt like I was going to be glorifying myself.
Yeah. Yeah.
I went on that vision trip with Mary, and the rest
Yeah.
is history.
And that's a big, we we have to be really careful about that. I mean, we were just talking about this in church on Sunday, um, looking at, Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount talking about when you give, don't give with sounding trumpets. He didn't say not to give. He said the reason why you should give should be different. You're either looking to make a name for yourself or you're looking to glorify his name. And that's that really comes down to it. And I really appreciate that kind of intentionality in your thought process, because it would be really easy to get swayed by something feeling like you're bringing something to God as opposed to letting God just lead you. Um,
Right.
and that time in Bolivia, I mean, that was really a life changing time for you. I remember actually Colette and I remember reading that letter when you announced that you and Angie were forming
Oh,
a
you read
family and
that?
everything. Yes, and like we remember praying for that. I like so how did that time in Bolivia? What were some of the big takeaways for you? How did you see God working in your life and your family's life that kind of are leading you up to this place where you are now?
Hmm. So the biggest takeaway, obviously, was what I took away from Bolivia, the daughter that I adopted there.
Mm,
So adopted Angie,
mm,
and she was 8 and
mm.
is now 21 and just got married over the summer and is about to make us grandparents.
Oh,
So
wow.
yeah, we're gonna be
Oh
grandparents,
boy.
Lord willing, on Mother's Day. So
Wow.
that's a big takeaway, definitely life changing there.
Mm,
Otherwise, it was just so wonderful to walk alongside people. It was what I do now, really, but it was in Spanish in a different culture. Just, student ministry, workplace ministry, but in Bolivia. So I was at a university doing student ministry there, but also we were doing stuff in the countryside, some workshops, and helping the professionals to have fellowship also. So those relationships were really powerful. And then being able to try to instill in them, many of them had come from the countryside into the city
mm,
to go to school. And so we wanted to instill in them a heart of service as well so that they could go back and serve in the countryside again and kind of
mm.
spread Christ's love further beyond the city than what we were doing there, just impacting the city some. So it was wonderful.
It's kind of, I'm hearing threads threads running through your story, that kind of intentionality with ministry, and really how it didn't necessarily matter where you were. God was still, drawing you towards that kind of um, discipleship, mentorship type of engagement with the people around you. Um, what what then made the transition? So how long were you in Bolivia?
Just 3 years.
3 years.
So I loved it, and I really hit my stride in that second year. Probably the first
Mm,
year's hard. Like we said, you're not on that mountaintop all the time.
right.
So really started to be comfortable and thrive in the ministry and relationships. But I had met a guy
Mm,
5 days before I moved to Bolivia, and
always.
married to him 11 years now. So he wanted to get married, so I came back and
Mm,
have been working here since 2012 when we got married. We weren't sure when we started talking and dating and engaged where we were going to be, if he was going to come
mm,
down there, if we were going to come up here. I ended up coming back here, and I love what I do now too.
mm.
So I'm pretty happy about that.
Well, and it gives you, I mean, it does give you a unique perspective, having gone through those different stages. And when you transition back to the United States, was there was there was there a thought for you in either continuing in education, continuing in clinical practice, or was it always just, did you always kind of have in your mind that CVM was going to be that natural next step for you? Um, yeah, in life. I mean, because there's lots of different options when you come back and starting you had started a new family and then starting an even newer family, right? And then a newer family as you make that next step with your three other little ones. Yeah, how did that decision to stay with CVM versus branching out into something else? How'd that come about?
Yeah, I don't remember that being a difficult decision either. Probably when I started to talk to Brad Fry, would have been my supervisor then. When I started to talk to him about coming back, they at some point probably pitched the idea of the kind of new region rep model that they were working toward, which you experienced as well.
Mhm.
And so I think when I came back, I knew that's what I was going to be doing. I
Mhm.
don't remember dabbling in the idea of doing practice again. I enjoyed practice. I feel like I probably lost a lot when I was in Bolivia because I was using it some, but everything was so different that I would have had to go back quite a bit to get up to speed here in the US again. But yeah, I think it was just a natural fit to try it out as a region rep.
Yeah, that model, and we'll have to talk some more about the department that you had now and kind of
Mm,
how that model works. Um, but in that transition, it does also seem like a really good fit for you, in that it seemed like, again, once again, that common thread of where God was taking you and the way that he was shaping your identity in him and the gifts that he had given to you. It seems like he just keeps reinforcing that more and more in your life. Do you find now, in your current role, do you feel more comfortable with that identity, or do you still struggle with that identity, or is it a constant change depending on the new things that are coming at you?
yeah, that's a good question. So I definitely feel comfortable in my identity working for CVM for 14 years, I guess. That's now kind of become an easy identity, just the Christian, because that's what I do for a living too, is just being in ministry. I don't feel comfortable. You identified a thread of mentorship and discipleship. I don't feel very confident or competent in that. I feel like I'm more of a worker bee. Like
Mm.
I'm the task one that can get jobs done. I'm not as good at inspiring others or motivating others to do them. And so I just, yeah, I'm more of a get the job done kind of person. But I do enjoy relationships and building our team and continuing to build our ministry too. So yeah, I think Fred always talks about how he never gets comfortable. There's always another challenge. And so
Right.
I am really comfortable in my job. And so it scares me a little bit because I'm like, oh no, is somebody going to take it away from me?
Well, I mean, um, if I were Fred, I'd be a little uncomfortable all the time too. So it's okay. I'm sorry. I love you, Fred. I love you, Fred.
We
For everyone
love you.
listening, we do.
We
No,
don't know if he listens to
but
this.
let me just say this then, because I so I appreciate how you identify, because you are really good at getting those things, making things get done, right? Keeping things on task and making it happen. But I wouldn't sell yourself short either, because I think that, like, when other people see that in you, it is also encouraging. Um, it can be encouraging to other people to have someone like that who helps keep things rolling along, and they can be inspired by that and noticing just. And I appreciate everything that you've shared from your from making the transition into vet school, during vet school, Bolivia, and beyond. I guess there's a lot there that I think that when folks hear, they can certainly connect to that story, and that kind of, maybe it's not an overt kind of discipleship like what we normally think of, or mentorship, but when people can see, oh look, there's Lauren getting things done, and she wasn't always confident that she could, and I'm not confident that I can, but if she could do it, I could probably do it too. So I appreciate
Mm-hmm.
that about you, um, and the way that you lead your team. Um,
Oh,
and
thanks.
and thanks for sharing some of your story. It's always hard on a podcast to get the depth and breadth of someone's life, but I really do appreciate you sharing those things with us today. And hopefully we'll be able to get together and let's chat a little bit more specifically about your role as the workplace and student ministries director, and the team that you've helped to assemble, and all the work that you're doing in CVM and through CVM, in those areas. So we'll chat again more, I guess, in another episode, because I think at this time we're probably about time. Um,
Sounds
Brett,
good.
yeah,
I'd love to.
I appreciate you taking the time again, and hopefully for everybody who's listening, the path isn't always the same, and the journey that God takes us on doesn't always look exactly like everyone else's journey. But hopefully, as you've listened to Dr. Lauren Charles' story, you can understand how we don't always have to have all the answers, as long as we are learning to be intentional about living at that place where two roads cross.
Thank you for listening to Two Roads Crossing, a podcast production of the Christian Veterinary Mission. If you are blessed by this content, like and subscribe so that you are alerted when new content is released. If you would like more information about CVM, or if you have questions, comments, or topical suggestions, you can find us online at www.cvm.org. Or you can contact us by emailing podcast@cvm.org. God has a plan for the nations, and that plan includes you. We pray that CVM has encouraged you to live out your calling with confidence and competence. So, until next time, may the voice of the shepherd ring loud and clear as you follow him in faith to the intersection of two roads crossing.